Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Jason and I are back for 2022. Jason, I always have to look. This is episode or segment 77 of what started off in 2020. We are back for the first time this year. The previous Monday was a company holiday. We got to celebrate a day off on January 3rd in lieu of the January 1st holiday. So I know we had a Tech Bites last Friday. Jason, our good colleagues, Melissa Palmer and Rick Vanover. If you didn't see it, encourage everyone to check it out. It was really great discussion as well as demonstration around everyone's probably top of mind topic going into this year, immutability and ransomware, triple play, double play immutability. But with that aside, Jason, welcome and hello 2022.
Happy New Year, Dave. Looking forward to another year of sharing some data and some opinions on what it really means.
Yeah, towards that end, we're doing something a little bit different, meaning we've been doing a lot of research, Jason, myself, and our colleague Julie Webb now for a couple of years, but we actually commissioned what was meant to be an internal research project to help guide our alliances teams, our product marketing teams, our sales groups. But what we actually thought is, Jason, there were a couple interesting data points that we thought, let's just go share this with everyone at large, just about what's going on in the market, because it is unique data. Maybe you could tell us, how did we get this data?
Yeah, so normally we use an independent firm whose only job is just to do panel work, and so they do global at scale, and they're absolutely phenomenal for this. But for this project, we really wanted to look at buying patterns, predominantly of enterprises in the United States, and more specifically, those folks that are really using legacy data center architectures. Now, what that kind of gives you, everyone kind of knows who the default legacy backup players are in the traditional data center. If you've been running physical servers for more than 10 to 15 years on raised floor, you probably have one of these products that can be spelled with 4 letters or less along the way. And so we saw some of that data and thought, this is actually really interesting data that's actually a twist on some of the questions that we typically ask to an unbiased panel. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at the first data that's out there. Now, this is, Dave, one of our favorite questions from our upcoming Data Protection Trends report. We've been doing that report for 3 years. That's a global project. This one, talking to those IT leaders in traditional data centers. And my guess is, just looking at the shape of the data, I could almost tell you it's Northeast business sector, maybe some Silicon Valley, but I mean, you can kind of get a feel for that based on the market share demographics. The first couple responses are pretty much in line with what you expect to see in an unbiased panel, but then there's a couple surprises, Dave. What were your thoughts? What did you see?
Yeah, and I am so remiss in not encouraging everyone to place in the comments, even if you're viewing after the fact, meaning not as we're live, where you're tuning in from. We'll go to a global map a couple different times. So as Jason mentioned, while this research is overweighted predominantly towards North America and a bit of Europe, we do think it is representative of worldwide. But speaking of worldwide, always like to get everyone involved. Feel free to drop in comments, not only where you're from, but if you have any reactions or other kinds of questions. We do have a team monitoring that, and we'll be doing everything we can to get to that in real time, meaning before we sign off. But to your point, Jason, yeah, this was interesting in that one of the curious things, I always like to look at the exceptions. So, you go kind of the top of the list and the bottom of the list, and you say, does this make sense to you, or is there anything that's surprising to you? Kind of what number 5-ish, 6-ish from the bottom there, to use different data protection tools for different workloads. Now, about 5 times as many people said, I want to check that box. That's interesting. It's a reason. But a pretty small number at 4% said that is really my most important goal. So a little bit of myth busting. And if you've tuned in the past, we do like to kind of myth bust and break down popularly held opinions. For a long time, Jason, there was a presumption in the industry, let's collapse the number of backup tools, ideally to one, but at least fewer. We're not seeing that here.
We're not. And in fact, if you look down, I think it's 6 spots from the top. right, to consolidate to a single backup solution, right? Dave, you and I have been in the market both going on 31, 32 years each, right? And in fact, at different times, you and I have each represented products that were that one ring to rule them all, right? And I think it's interesting that in this particular audience, when you are looking at those folks who are using legacy data center mantras, there still seems to be trained to look for that as one of the defining characteristics of what the next backup solution looks like. So you see that in the number 6 spot, 28% of orgs said, yes, I'd like a single solution. And that's lovely, right? But then when you ask the respondents, okay, so pick the most important choice, 1%. Yeah. 1% said, okay, that's the defining solution. So yeah, it's something that some folks are looking for. But candidly, when we look at how multi and how hybrid organizations are, and oh, by the way, how most legacy backup solutions don't do multi and hybrid well, right? I think it's really interesting that while they'd like to have a single solution, almost nobody on this survey says, yeah, that's what's going to make the decision for me.
Right. Oh, and I do want to address it in real time. Arvin gave us a nice shout out, said Veeam, one of the best backup software. Thank you very much, Arvin. Appreciate that. And keep the comments coming in. Yeah, you're right. It's very interesting. Again, we know actually what solutions the respondents were running on, and it is heavily overweighted towards Dell EMC and IBM. So Heritage EMC, Networker, Avamar, things of that like, and Spectrum Protect TSM, things of that like. And a little bit lower representation was Veritas, Commvault, Veeam, and then much, much lower was Rubrik Cohesity. And interesting that cost by both metrics, meaning choose everything that applies, but also if you could choose only one, bubbled up to the top, reduce software or hardware costs. And then I always like how you point out when we ask a flavor of this question, Jason, that there are a couple ways you can combine costs. If you look at ROI, TCO, they're at number 3. I mean, cost hits hard, hits high, but also maybe not surprising, operational complexity came up disproportionately higher than what we typically see, meaning if you looked at across all of the different products or vendors in the industry.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an accident that reducing complexity and moving from an on-prem to a cloud-powered solution are adjacent to each other in the list, right? Because for a lot of organizations, the idea of racking and stacking and building your own thing, when you could just go to a managed service and have a smarter, or at least as smart but dedicated human monitoring that infrastructure for you, that alone can reduce your complexity along the way. So I like that those are adjacent. So let's kind of sum this up then, right? So 2 of the top 3 are economically driven. Cost is number 1, value is number 3. Moving towards cloud and reducing complexity are adjacent in the 4 and 5 spots. But let's not overlook, Dave, that beautiful data point on number 2, right? To improve reliability.
Yes.
That drives me nuts that in 2022 we're still struggling with reliability. Now, I would like to believe that a large part of that is as organizations have modernized production faster than they modernize protection, they are exacerbating the legacy-ness of their legacy solutions, and they're finding it's just not keeping up, and so they're having inadequate backups. Yes, reliability should be top of mind, but that should not surprise anybody. Dave, we see this every time we ask this question, though. Every panel says reliability.
Yeah, it does. And that's what concerns me, because we can kind of try to make apologies for what might be more recent pandemic, focusing on the tactical, changing environments, accelerated shift to the cloud. However, this has been number 1 or in the number 2, if not 3 spot. So last couple of years, meaning now 3+ years, reliability comes up very high, if not the highest. And it's just now, after probably close to no exaggeration, 6,000 data points that we've got on this. Globally, over a period of years, reliability is 1 or 2, sometimes 3, but usually 1 or 2. There's a real challenge here, and it's not that the companies aren't working hard, the people aren't really capable. It's that the environment keeps shifting, to your point, and of course we have global macroeconomic things going on. But as an industry, half a century into backup, literally no exaggeration, over 50 years, some form of backup and recovery has been taking place for
So
one out of five.
Let's do a myth bust, though, because it would be really easy just to say, well, everyone always wants to cost cheaper and reliability is never going to be perfect, right? You could easily just hand wave and dismiss those things. But we've seen other options in this particular question that have really kind of bubbled down the bottom and really become table stakes, right? Things like I want to move from CapEx to OpEx. That's 5 years ago, that was really cool and disruptive. And now today, a lot of solutions can be consumed with that. It became table stakes. I want to consume it as software only. I don't want to have to buy those big monolithic kits. Again, bubble down because it's mostly table stakes now. So there's a lot of things in this list that kind of bubble down to the point that sometimes we even dropped them from the bottom of the list because they just keep scoring low. But reliability keeps coming in high. And cost keeps coming in high. And I just got to say that's because that's still front of mind as a problem. It's not just something that'll never go away.
Well, don't you think the two intertwine, Jason? Meaning, if you have a reliability issue, you might have a car issue. I mean, that was the analogy I was going to use, a cost issue. So think about a car in your daily life. Like, it runs well, the value seems high. So I don't have a cost issue. I almost wonder if it's more value than cost. If it's reliable, I am not as concerned about it because I perceive good level of value in return for it.
I'm going to be the pessimist on this one, and probably because I did not have coffee this morning. But I'm going to turn that around and say that if your backup solution economically is disadvantageous, you're in the fourth or fifth year of gouging maintenance, and you actually haven't had any real product or R&D in the last couple of years, then you have an insufficient backup product, and so you're going to have poor reliability because of that. So I'm going to flip that around and say if you're not investing in modern data protection, then you probably do have a reliability problem.
Fair point. And I do want to give a shout out. Please keep entering in comments where you may be tuning in from. We'll try to hit that very soon. Actually, we'll hit it now. We've got Jason in Texas. I'm in Colorado. Production team in Georgia. We've got someone from Ohio. Someone also, if you look across the world, from Cayman Islands. That's one that we don't get all that often, Jason. As well as we've got Saudi Arabia. Thank you for tuning in and coming to us live there. And, I think if we move on to the next slide, Jason, maybe and I don't want to leave out, we've got Romania as well. So thank you for that. Now, if we go to the second slide, this is an interesting one because it's color-coded. It's actually representing two different data points, and we're kind of conjoining them. Take us through what that is.
Yeah, so in this particular study, one of the things we wanted to look at, and as we shared, one of the goals was to find, okay, so what are folks using in these particular targeted markets? And so we did ask, hey, why did you buy your current solution that you're using for enterprise backup? And you see those in orange. And then in a separate question, giving a slightly different stacking, what are you looking for next in your next data protection solution of choice? Now, in some cases, there's a lot of overlap, right? So several of these, like the support for different kinds of workloads, you see those on that right-hand side. Reliability, hey, it's not like we haven't seen that in the last 20 minutes. Price value and economics comes in there as well. I think there's kind of two things that are really interesting for me here. Asking nearly the same question on both your present mode and what you're looking for, it doesn't really surprise me that just basic sentiment, everyone wants that hetero and that multi and that hybrid. I mean, look at the right-hand side, right? Every one of the workloads is even of higher perceived importance along the way. Reliability, perceived higher importance along the way. Other than that, that was the thing I thought was most interesting in this. Admittedly, probably had a little bit of a miss on this one. I wish we'd asked exactly the same, because surely there would have been some that went down if others went up. But still, overall, what I think is interesting is that even those broad, traditional, or perhaps legacy data centers, they're seeing a heightened need for all kinds of heterogeneous and hybrid applications, and that I thought was interesting from this data.
Yeah, I'll channel my inner sort of pessimistic self here. Reliability was number one in what they wanted, and it's an even higher number one in what they're going to look for next. So actually 24%, almost a quarter, placed reliability, which was the number one why you selected your current solution, placed that of even more importance. So that's a way of saying we didn't get what we came for, and this is the number one thing we came here for.
I think that's a fair read, right? And if we keep going back to it, and again, we don't get to go ask, all several hundred folks that took this survey, hey, why did you put each of those answers? But I'm going to read in between the lines here, and I'm doubling down on, as folks get more and more towards hybrid and multi, and just the more we've never had as much diversity of production workloads as we have in 2022, and I think that's why you're seeing that uptick. I mean, no one is saying they need less NAS or less Oracle. Or, and obviously IaaS is on the rise, and Office 365 or Microsoft 365 is on the rise. No one's saying they need less of any of their other workloads. They're adding in all cases, and I think that's what's exacerbating and we need it to work better.
Yeah, good comment on the workloads. It's not a complete shift. I mean, we know directionally we're moving towards more next-gen databases, more as a service, moving more into the cloud, but we're not decommissioning or turning off things, especially from an enterprise perspective, at a commensurate rate. So it is an and where we're embracing the legacy, charged with keeping that going, as well as needing to increasingly respond to production capabilities that have accelerated their movement, probably due to global economic activity. So I just look at the top three blue bars and say reliability, clearly number one, wanting then to integrate with your server storage hardware, number two, and right behind it, over a third, ease of use. And it's just a little concerning from an industry perspective. Again, this is overweighted towards predominantly two vendors. The two vendors that used to be, not too many years ago, number one and number two in market, now number one and number four in market. But there are concerns. It's an interesting scorecard and kind of a directional statement. But I really like your takeaway, Jason, that things aren't going away, things aren't getting easier, things aren't streamlining yet.
Yeah, and you know what? If I had a large established enterprise of IT, I think the key word that I'd be thinking about for 2022 is dilution, right? So as organizations are embracing microservices, as they're embracing IaaS, as they're embracing more SaaS along the way, they are adding those workloads far faster than they are decommissioning those other things. And there are going to be some workloads that are not going to migrate over. Until that line of business turns off, they will use that legacy platform, probably on the same legacy metal they originally put it on. Right. So that's why I say it's a dilution, where you're going to see more and more cloud, but that other stuff isn't going away. But oh, by the way, as we know, the more tools that you use for that, the more complex that gets. So it doesn't surprise me that ease of use is almost as paramount as reliability. But again, I still think it comes back to the diversity of heterogeneity that we have in the modern IT landscape.
Yeah. Yep. Well said. Well said. I think we've got Netherlands that are also in as well. Thank you very much for that. Let's take a look at one more data point. I think this one's a little more straightforward, but also very illuminative. Mm-hmm. So what will you look for when choosing your next data protection solution vendor? Now, we asked a slightly different kind of question here, and innovation comes up really high, but we've got sort of this interesting breakdown, Jason, a grouping of top three, a grouping of three in the middle, and then a looser grouping of three in the bottom. What was your reaction on this one?
So remember in this case, and the respondents were actually given a little bit of guidance on this particular one, in that we were looking at actually two different kinds of questions related to the solution, the products, the widgets that you actually buy, and then the vendor, what kind of company do you actually want to do business with and rely on, partner with moving forward. So in this case, we're talking about the vendor, not necessarily solution elements. These are a little out of order. And so technically innovative, I thought, was, again, that kind of leans me right back into multi and hybrid, doesn't it? I mean, because what we're seeing is that a lot of the legacy folks, one of their big condemnations is that they're just not keeping up with those hybrid and IaaS and SaaS-based production workloads. Breadth of applications comes in. I actually also thought it was really interesting that that product support and customer service make the top three, right? So I need to know that their technology is going to keep up. I need them to cover what I currently have. And oh, by the way, I need to rely on them as a partner. I don't want to be a number in a queue, and I don't want to only hear from them when it's time for renewal, right? I love that there's experiential in the top three priorities for what they're looking for in a vendor.
That was actually something that was surprising to me, meaning if you look at non-product things,
yes,
customer support, ease of doing business, you could argue brand is largely influenced by non-product as well as product. And then at the bottom, company size or longevity in market. Overweighted towards these other things at a higher rate than I thought that it would be, but it's probably makes sense given the sample size of who was predominantly surveyed here. They're the two vendors that have been losing the most share for the longest period of time. They're share donors, in other words, and that was frankly one of the reasons we wanted to understand more about what was the thought process behind a couple of vendors that have been conceding share and doing so on a multi-year basis. So the thought was that the company size may be one of the reasons that kept them hanging on to the current vendor. There might have been friction to move, right? But clearly we're not seeing that here, are we?
We aren't, and also I think it's really interesting that that the most traditional workloads as well as the bleeding edge, both edges, if you will, of workloads actually come near the bottom of the list. There's a lot more things that are more important to these to this set of legacy data center buyers. Around, hey, my old metal is probably covered. That's not really what I worry about. And when we think about the fact that for many organizations, they're not going to get one ring to rule them all. They're going to buy a modern data protection solution for their modern workloads, and they're probably going to keep running whatever legacy dinosaur backup they were running before for their legacy dinosaur platforms, like their Unix stuff, right? So I'm actually really comfortable with that. And most of those organizations, the larger you are, unless you have dedicated DevOps, may not be on the bleeding edge yet of containers and microservices. So I think it's interesting that both edges of the workloads are really minimal compared to so many other qualitative experiences.
Yeah, well, very well said. So, what I want to do, because unfortunately we don't have a report, we didn't plan to publish actually this data or even share it externally, but we thought it was pretty interesting while specific from a geographic perspective and largely overweighted specifically to a couple of vendors. It is nonetheless clear data points, which you can't get just anywhere else. But what we wanted to do is share a slide with things that we could share with you or update you on, and that's particularly around the mid-market. Maybe take us through that, Jason.
So earlier this year, we did some work on specifically looking at mid-market. One of the things that's been actually rather fortuitous over the last 2 years is Dave and Julie Webb and I have been spending a lot more time on just trying to better understand not just the macro trends in data protection, but really for each of the markets that we want to commit to serve, how do we do that to an even finer degree? And so we just shared data today on what's going on in the enterprise, especially within the Americas. We also did a survey on specifically looking at the mid-market. So we covered this earlier this year, but if you really want to understand what's going on in those organizations, say under 1,000 employees, or actually in many cases under 500, we looked at some of our favorite questions on key trends, but only asking a smaller set of groups. We looked at what small businesses and mid-sized businesses are doing, and spoiler alert, cloud fares even more heavily to them. And then, Dave, when I first started in the data protection space, I started as a channel person. I was an SC at a little reseller in Dallas, Texas, selling just to folks that I could drive to within a day and back home again. And I love the fact that 31 years later, what is the role of the VAR? What is the role of the MSP? What is the role of those partners to supplement the knowledge, to supplement the hands and feet on site? And so those were kind of the three big areas we looked at. And all three of those actually are available for downstream. We'll ask the social media folks to throw some links in there before the hour is over.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually have those handy. So let me do that right now, and we will get those into chat on the platforms. And so what I want to do now is just transition out as I begin to wind down, Jason. I know we've got a little more geographic activity from the United States, Illinois. We've also got France, Iraq, and India in the house as well, getting multiple geographies going. So certainly appreciate that. I think we mentioned Netherlands earlier on as well. So give a continued shout out. Thank you, Cayman Islands. For those of us that are in the snow right now, it's hard not to be very envious of your warm weather. So that's outstanding. As we look ahead, Jason, in the United States, there is a federal or government holiday coming up 1 week from today. So we won't have a Monday live stream. Now we will, though, the week after that, meaning on the 24th, so January 17th, next Monday is a federal holiday in the United States, but the following Monday, January 24th. Jason and our colleague Jeff Reichert will be on discussing regulatory compliance in the public and private sector. And our Friday Tech Bites, Rick and Melissa will be back this Friday, January 14th, focusing on how to do a backup health check. So we encourage you to be able to tune in to the future episodes. We won't be back next Monday, but back on our regular cadence the Monday after that. Tech Bites has started rolling, and they will continue rolling this Friday. Be sure to check out the research links that we're going to post in there, and keep your comments and questions coming. Thanks very much, Jason, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.